Branko Zečević, and the topic of the conversation is open source toolchains in enterprise retail software.
Unmute. Sorry, that was not intentional. I hope that you can hear me all well. Good day to you. My name is Branko Zečević. I'm CEO, and at Pointer I will be talking today about, well, open source toolchains in enterprise retail software. Just a brief overview of the agenda. Obviously, we will do some form of introduction. I wish to present a case study that I believe is worth presenting and will indicate some of the things that we considered when developing this particular piece of software, some common tasks that typically appear in enterprise retail business-oriented applications. We will give some notes. I will give some notes on the toolchain we selected, why we did this, and why in general about open source, and how this helped us, obviously, in our development path. I will also try to identify some examples where we struggled a bit and where the whole approach and the logic of open source helped us. Retail is a traditional industry, and obviously the development of traditional enterprise level retail applications is commonly based on legacy systems, proprietary systems. These are typically closed source implementations of toolchains. There is heavy use of long time standing industry specific data formats. Retail is very much XML oriented, has also dedicated XML semantic languages. And of course, since we deal also with hardware interfaces and a significant scope of hardware devices, peripherals, there is all sorts of legacy standards for interfacing with these hardware devices. Okay? And to compete with that, obviously, the retail is a changing industry, an evolving industry, and the demands presented today and for the future, obviously, somewhat hinder easy adaptation of these proprietary implementations. We typically now deal with a whole new scope or an ever-changing scope of legal requirements in all of Europe, typically fiscalization, electronic invoicing, things like that. There are some technological advancements, electronic journaling, big data in general. Web-based technologies are something that retailers are very keen on adopting, or have been keen on adopting in the past decade, let's say. There is heavy burden on integration with third-party applications, loyalties, CRMs, whatever. We have a whole new generation of retail hardware, typically kiosk or self-checkout, self-service oriented. And of course, cloud is buzz, so retailers depend on it as well. The case study I would like to refer to is basically a subset of the total scope of retail services that we implement. It refers to fiscalization. And the case study I would like to present is also a feature comparison between the implementation we did for two territories, for the Republic of Croatia and for the Republic of Serbia. I made here references to the respective legislative foundations. These are the acts referring to that. It is to be noted, of course, that Croatia has a reasonably stable implementation for fiscal services because the act has been published in 2012 and the implementations have started, or the application of the law was started in 2013. The application of the respective regulation in Serbia came about this year, actually. The regulation is from 2020, however. And of course, the big thing about this is that the implementation models differ. In Croatia, there was, the option was to have online fiscalization with some form of subsequent processing. And in Serbia, for example, we needed to struggle with a hybrid form of implementation where you can have both online in terms of direct access to the server of the tax administration and local processing, in other words, a very autonomous way to handle this. Okay? And this is the world we live in. When you compare features, regulatory and technological and technical in both of these, for both of these territories. We need to adapt, obviously, to very different connectivity models. We need to support different invoice types, tax schemes, tax configurations. We need to struggle with rounding and very diverse models of rounding. So as you can see very quickly, if we pick any of these elements, you will see that, and this is a good example, obviously. I could have had a slide with 7 countries in Europe, and all these would be somewhat different, obviously. Okay? If we go more into the area of technological things, you will note that in some territories we have to deal with predefined invoice layouts. In other words, an invoice, a receipt that you get in a store has a dedicated structure. In Croatia, this is, for example, not the case. Data formats may vary, protocols may vary, security may vary, and one of the big features, for example, for the implementation in the Republic of Serbia was access and use of smart cards, which have multiple applications on the smart card, identifying both the certificate and data counters for fiscal information. And obviously, depending upon the sorry. Okay, I should mute this first, right? Now? Okay, works now. Unmute. You will find a very similar situation if you compare the Croatian model to countries like Germany, Austria. Okay, this is a regional context, so for this reason, I try to identify this as well. Very common tasks in business operations: rounding, different types of rounding precision, calculations with fixed point decimal numbers. We struggle with tax calculations, all the things you as a customer normally don't see, we have to consider. The ubiquitous examples are always struggles with time zones, timestamps, time synchronization in general, because some regulations mandate this. In other words, you have to have a mandatory form of synchronization between your application and the server of the tax office. We struggle with and deal with multiple languages, multiple writing systems, things like Unicode normalization, okay? Not to forget that Latin A is not equal to Cyrillic A, right? We deal with barcodes. They are commonly used for invoice verification. In multiple territories, we have diverse symbologies, diverse data encoding, use of very different image formats for that. Maybe just to identify some of the more tech stuff. Cryptography, obviously. How to import and retrieve certificates from a file, from a smart card. How to generate, retrieve keys, use encryption, decrypt something. And in a particular case of one of these territories, obviously, we had to develop or access a communication to the smart card reader and between the smart card reader and the smart card, based on the so-called APDU, okay? And of course, since retail is an industry as it is, we have to design and consider that we always face long-term support. Long-term application implies long-term support. So the lifetime of retail application is very seldom shorter than 10 years. And this is something that we have to do. Well, our tool chain, just to give you a hint of where we went to, our principal development language is Go. I place some database, some reference to the database engines we like to use, and also to the user interface elements we generally consider when developing reporting and that sort of application. However, I will make a point of identifying where Go and that particular philosophy behind the programming language helped us resolve some of the issues we faced during our development path. Why Go? All of you that use Go may recognize this. We liked very much the idea that Go has as a de facto standard something that is referred to as a promise of compatibility. In other words, we selected this programming language in order to have the benefit of relying upon a long-term support on behalf of the major IT company that supports this language, which, as we all know, is really a traditionally closed source company. Obviously, in this case, it's Google. We have a fully open source tool set. We have an extensive library, a standard library, which we could use to develop all the features we needed. And of course, in our extent, when developing business applications, the principal benefit, as is always the case with open source, is to be able to inspect, recompile, change, modify, review code that is implemented both in the principal tools and all the tool chains, and also, of course, the libraries, or in order to adapt, if needed, to specific needs. Some of the examples where we needed to do this, where we struggled a bit, we learned our lessons is, well, simple things like comparing our form of encryption with the encryption model of a proprietary closed source system of the tax administration. In this particular case, it was the tax administration of Serbia. So you're fighting against a big machine somewhere. They are telling you that your encryption model is wrong, and then, of course, it helped us to have the benefit of inspecting what we did and what was done in the library to be able to alleviate that. Rounding. We pinpointed a nice problem with rounding schemes within the server at the tax administration, which hopefully helped us as well. But, for example, we had a nice feature, we were able to scale, to vary the precision in our monetary calculations to pinpoint the error that we fished out. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, whenever you do something with time, we always struggle with time resolution. Is it nano? Is it micro? How do we handle time zones? And the tax server people, the tax administration people are sometimes very sort of formally oriented, and of course all these services helped us accommodate this as well. In general, our process of selection of a tool chain, and in this case, in practical terms, why we selected Go, is based on some of the principal criteria. Obviously, licensing, not necessarily because of the cost, but because of contractual dependencies, which are given to you once you license something. We rely heavily and enjoy relying on community-based support, and are at the same time quite happy that within the community we can find, as an option, access to vendors offering commercial support for a particular open source segment. We believe and find that the open source community is a very innovative one, and obviously having access to cutting edge technology helps us obviously deliver modern applications and in effect reduce our time to market a particular product. And flexibility. Vendor lock-in is a typical context. Vendor-specific roadmaps are something that hurt us quite a lot in general terms because of the long time of use. And to that extent, of course, as always, the principal challenges were, well, planning, how to select a tool chain, how to select a library, how to identify what are the components that we need to hold, and how do we mitigate support issues arising in the future. Obviously, we rely on best practices and our know-how about the retail. However, we also would like and enjoy the benefit of having the option to audit our source code, all of the tool chain components, to enable us to optimize them if needed, and as usual, documentation. Thank you. That's all I wanted to present. You have my contacts here if you wish to discuss any of these things. Feel free to approach us. If you wish to consider working with us or learning about what we do, or maybe what we can do together, feel free to approach me. Any questions? Yeah, sure.
How much percent of turnover is online when you do the taxation?
Oh, this is really this is really territory dependent. In Croatia, the principal model is online. So ideally, 100% of transactions should go online. Subsequent fiscalization may depend on a number of factors which do not relate to the operational stability of the implementation of the tax server. It can also depend upon your internal infrastructure. In Serbia, for example, if you go the so-called offline local processing model, then implicitly everything is in the first instance handled locally, and then there is a subsequent process of auditing in which you deliver data to the tax office. So these are time-wise discriminate processes. It's a very different thing. So modeling may imply the percentage allocation of online versus offline.
I meant by that how much of the turnover is generated via internet purchases?
Oh, well, this I cannot answer. We don't deal in internet purchases. We are hardcore retailers. Oh, we serve hardcore retailers. Exactly. So that's our world. So internet shops are, can't say. Maybe someone else has a nice figure in relate to that. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you once again.